Asset location is a really powerful tool to help increase your after-tax returns and decrease your required minimum distributions. But you have to actually put it into practice. We've touched on how to do that in broad strokes before, and we've even got our asset location matrix to help. But today, I want to get really specific on how to do that and walk through an example so you can see how to take advantage of asset location in your own portfolio. As a quick refresher on the big ideas in play here, we want to take advantage of the differences in how your investment accounts are taxed through time. The whole idea is to match up the things you're investing in with the accounts where they make the most sense. We don't want the same stuff in the same weights in each of your different accounts. Your 401k should probably look different from your brokerage account, which should in turn probably look different from your Roth IRA. If you want to really dig in and get at the underlying logic, you can take a look at the video we've got linked up in the corner here. But the two driving factors are that we want to minimize the tax drag on investments in our taxable accounts and shift the growth out of our tax-deferred accounts. Most people get why keeping stuff with a big tax bill away from your brokerage accounts makes sense. We generally prefer to pay fewer taxes if we can get away with it. But I get a lot more questions about the second part there, that all else equal, we prefer our growth to not be in our tax-deferred account if we can get away with it. Admittedly, that all else being equal is doing a whole bunch of work. We still want as much growth as we can get, but to the extent that we can choose where it happens. We don't really want it to happen in our traditional 401k or IRA. The reason for this is that you can think of the government as effectively a silent partner in your tax-deferred accounts. They're going to tax all of the money you take out as ordinary income. So the more the investments in those accounts grow, the bigger the tax bill is going to be when you go to spend it. Plus, bigger tax-deferred accounts mean bigger RMDs. Now, having your 401k grow too much is definitely a very nice problem to have. You're paying more in taxes because, well, you have more money. But because most of us have our investments in a bunch of different accounts, we can choose which investments to put where. So we have a lot of control over this. And as I mentioned earlier, paying attention to your asset location can mean both lower taxes and keeping more of our money. So how do we do it? Well, before I get into the example, I'll call out our asset location matrix, which will give you the framework for how to put everything together for yourself. And you can get your own copy for free by going to retirementresearcher.com/location. It should be on the screen here, and it's also down in the description below. But let's go in and run through an example. Just so we're working with big round numbers, let's say we've got a $1 million portfolio. Half of it's in your tax-deferred account, and then a quarter each is in your taxable and tax-exempt account. And you've gone through the Designing Your Asset Location workshop that I did in our membership site, the Retirement Researcher Academy, and you decided that you want a 60-40 allocation. So 60% stocks and 40% bonds. And even more specifically, you want 30% of your portfolio in the broad U.S. stock market, another 5% in U.S. small value stocks, 20% in the broad international stock market, 5% more in REITs or real estate investment trusts, which can be really great diversifiers in your portfolio, but we'll touch on that topic in a few minutes. And then finally, that big 40% slug in bonds. So how do we go about slotting everything into place? Well, the first thing I always do when I'm thinking about asset location is stick our bonds in the tax-deferred account. Bonds are not exactly the most tax-efficient things in the world, so we don't really want them in our taxable accounts, and they're generally pretty low growth, so we don't really want them in our tax-exempt account, where we want to maximize the growth to take advantage of that money being free and clear of taxes. Bonds are effectively the quintessential tax-deferred asset. And in this case, they eat up the bulk of the tax-deferred account, $400,000 to $500,000 in there. So 80% of our tax-deferred account will be in our bonds. And that's okay. As I said, getting our bonds in the tax-deferred account is our first priority here. Next up, we're going to deal with our REITs. Like I mentioned earlier, REITs can be a really great way to add diversification into your portfolio. They have stock-like returns and volatility, but they also have pretty darn low correlation with most of the other stuff in your portfolio. But they also come with a pretty nasty tax bill. There's a reason we're dealing with them right after the bonds. So they have a high tax bill, meaning that we want to avoid our taxable account, and also relatively high growth. So we want to avoid our tax-deferred account. Just like bonds are basically made for your tax-deferred accounts, REITs are basically made for your tax-exempt accounts. So we'll stick them in there. At this point, we're left with our U.S. total market stocks, our U.S. small value stocks, and our international total market stocks. Let's focus on our U.S. small value stocks next. These stocks are going to be riskier than a market portfolio, which hopefully means they're going to have a higher return, or at least a higher expected return than the market portfolio, because they're tilted towards both small and value. So we're going to stick them in our tax-exempt account to try and maximize our growth there. Now we have a decision to make. The only things left are the U.S. and international total market funds. There's no particular reason to believe that either the U.S. or non-U.S. stocks will outperform the other going forward. There's no particular difference in the level of risk between two companies just because one's headquartered in Paris, Texas, and the other's in Paris, France. But there is a difference in their tax treatment. With international investments, there's something called the foreign tax credit. Basically, a lot of different countries tax investment distributions before they get sent out to the non-local investors. In this case, that means us. And with a lot of those countries, the U.S. government will essentially give us back that money with that foreign tax credit. But because it's a tax credit, we only get to use it if those assets are in our taxable account. It's not usually a ton of money, but I would still rather get that money back than not. So we'll put the international stocks in our taxable account. To be clear, if there was a real difference between our U.S. stocks and our non-U.S. stocks in terms of distribution levels or expected return, that would very quickly be a bigger deal than the foreign tax credit. But since there's not a real difference, we don't need to worry. And then we're just left with our U.S. total market stocks. So we just fill up the empty spaces. And in this particular case, it's nice, since even a really bad 401k plan will usually have either a U.S. total market option or at least an S&P 500 fund, which will at least get you pretty darn close to your target allocation there. But that's it. We've got all of our investments placed in the accounts where they work best. It's really not that complicated. It's just about moving systematically through your portfolio and slotting things in wherever makes sense. And also there's space. That said, we do have an asset location calculator in our membership site, the Retirement Researcher Academy, which I mentioned earlier. Now, this calculator makes it even easier to set up your own asset location. And if you're curious about the Academy, you can go to retirementresearcher.com/sign up. Like always, the link's on the screen here and also in the description below. Asset location sounds complicated, and it definitely does take a little bit of organization and puzzle solving. But as we just saw, it's really not that hard to put in place. And it's worth the effort. In our last two videos, we've seen just how powerful asset location is and what it can do for both your after-tax returns, how much money you can actually go out and spend, and how to reduce your RMDs to preserve your flexibility in retirement. You just need to go do it. If this was helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can see what we're up to. If you have any questions on this or any other questions that you'd like me to address, just drop them in the comments below. You can also check us out on the web at retirementresearcher.com and make sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we're doing.